Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's July the 22nd. This is the Daily Factor. My name is Faraz Patel. We are glad to have you with us. I hope you had a fantastic Eid, and we'll be with you for the next 45 to 50 minutes. Now, we were supposed to return to normal programming, but that will return back, inshallah, God willing, on Monday, because today, we had to make a special sort of an arrangement because our guest today goes under so many of titles. She is a anti-apartheid activist, a medical doctor, an academic, a businesswoman. She was the one-time managing director of the World Bank, and she is the co-founder of Imagine SA. I'd like to welcome Dr. Mampela Rampele. Doctor, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to your show.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Dr. Rampele, when we look about Reimagining SA, especially after the week that we had gone through, what would you say is the way forward for South Africa? I know we got so much to talk to, but just to kick the conversation off, how do we go ahead and reimagine SA for a brighter and a more prosperous future for our country?
The events of the last week are a wake-up call that we are on a wrong development pathway as a young nation. And like everybody else, if you are lost, the best thing is to stop, reflect, and reimagine a different way of getting to the goals that you set, or even to revisit those goals. And my belief is that the events of last week or the past few days are an indicator that South Africa that we dreamt of and saw being born in 1994 requires a reimagination. And that reimagination doesn't have to go very far. If you go into the preamble of our Constitution, it was very clear that we recognize that 300 plus years of colonial conquest and apartheid and racism that deliberately promoted white privilege and impoverished the majority of people who are indigenous people is not going to go away simply because we've got a human rights constitution. We said that we need to heal the wounds of that past, and we need to install within the psyche of the nation the values of human rights, which are the values of Ubuntu, so that we together can work to promote the talents of each and everybody so that citizens can be critical thinkers who contribute to the future we would like to inhabit. We did not do that. And this is now an opportunity for a restart.
Dr. Rampele, and that's where I want to take the next question to. So we have 1994 coming in, and as you mentioned, the 300 to 400 years of colonialism and oppression, and it was, further instigated by apartheid. And many people believe that the ruling party, the African National Congress, can change all of that. 27 years in to the new democracy, those, ailments of apartheid are still there. You go to the townships, service delivery is not there. You go to, when you look at unemployment, 11.4 million people at this day and age right here in South Africa are unemployed. And we have to ask ourselves that these broken promises, right, by the ruling party, by our government, has really failed the people, hasn't it?
Yes, and correctly so. No constitutional democracy anywhere in the world can thrive and remain accountable if the people, the owners of the democracy, the citizens, allow themselves to be captured as our people, as by the ANC, which calls itself the leader of society. There is no democracy that can have a party that projects itself as the one and only. And so this failure, this inability of this leader of the people, quote unquote, is again a wake-up call. Because South Africans, we have seen even this week, when they realize that they were on their own, they stand up. And now we shouldn't stand up in anger. We should stand up as citizens who realize that we have been missing in action. We have trusted too much in the leadership of anybody. It could have been Mandela, it could have been anybody. No one human being and no single political party has the wisdom to accomplish for a people that which is precious and which is sustainable across time and across generations.
Dr. Rampele, and then, when we speak about unemployment, and this is where, the big supposed debate comes in, 11.4 million, this is not just a small number. I mean, in a country of 60 million, that is around, 15 to 20% of our population, even more, that just cannot find jobs. And when you drive past, for example, labor departments, and you see those long lines, it's a sad reality of what our country has been, including those false promises that were made for employment. Each and every president that has come since 1994 has promised employment. And as a citizen, surely you would feel frustrated by that.
Well, frustration is one thing, but realizing that no one can create jobs for all of the millions of South African people using the current development model. Our development model, socioeconomic development model, is a direct continuation of the apartheid economy. Just look at our cities, fly into any city. You can tell where indigenous poor people live, and you can tell where white privileged plus the newly rich live. That tells you that it's not a question of let's work harder to create jobs. It is a question of going back to the drawing board. This is where reimagination is so important, because our economy is driven by consumerism. There is a kind of poetic justice in the destruction of shopping malls in the townships, because those shopping malls are simple vacuum cleaners. You come in as an owner of a shopping mall, you set up shop, all you do is to collect rents. And the liquidity, the cash flow that should be circulating within Soweto or Mamelodi or Alex is taken out to Bishop's Court, to Camps Bay, to everywhere else except where those poor people who earn the little that they have live. Worse, we're talking about 11 million people being unemployed. We've got 17 million people depending on social grants. No dignity can come out of getting social grants unless you are disabled or you are aged or you are a child who cannot help themselves. This creation of a large segment of the population to be dependent on so-called our government is exactly what's making it possible that people can vote for the same government and tomorrow go and destroy an infrastructure that is public infrastructure, but that they associate with the government. So they think they are hitting at the government by doing that. So what we need is a reimagination, not only of the socioeconomic system, but an important part of that is transforming our education away from it being the continuation of the rote learning of the English grammar school to being an education that liberates, the Polafre education, which we as activists in the Black consciousness movement began to introduce in our literacy programs, and we used it in the leadership training for the young people who ended up being the leaders of June 16, 1976. They were not directed by us, but they were liberated from the fear of opposing a system that was humiliating them and that was feeding them third-rate education. That third-rate education looks like $1 million today compared to a 10th grade education system for the poorest children in our country. I believe that citizens of this country need to take this crisis as an opportunity to go back to the drawing board, insist not on delivery. No one should be delivering anything to a citizen. Citizens are entitled to basic services that are not about delivery, as they call it, but they are about effective governance, where cities, towns, villages, schools, clinics work as they should. And we have the technology, we have the expertise, but the problem we have is the patch with the African National Congress that is like a cancer that has sapped its energy and its idealism.
And we are going to be touching on that on the next segment, Dr. Rampele. Dr. Rampele, just to close off this segment, the apartheid legacy, and it's something that is, of course, from the 400 years since the first colonialists came here. And you mentioned the cities, you compare Alex to Sandton, or you compare Camps Bay to Khayelitsha, or you compare Umhlanga to the informal settlements in KwaZulu-Natal, and so on and so forth. And you compare education, especially with the pit toilets that are in many of the rural or the township schools. And you see that this legacy continues to remain there. How do we go ahead and address it? And what does government need to do to go ahead and address it? Or are they too late because we're already 27 years into the new government?
Well, let me tell you that the reconstruction and development program that the first government instituted was meant to lay the social and physical infrastructure for addressing that legacy. It was stopped in its tracks by the adoption of a liberal economic model by President Thabo Mbeki and an articulation of an economic model that was aimed at creating a black middle class, a black bourgeoisie. That assumes that the poorest people in Nkanduli or in Limpopo were no longer a focus. Jay Naidoo, who was then the Minister of Reconstruction and Development, remains traumatized by the betrayal of our failure to do what the Afrikaners did when they took over in 1948. They had a reconstruction and development process for the Afrikaners. They didn't create a visa or a rupet. What they did was to create the social and the physical infrastructure that made sure every Afrikaner child goes to school, gets enough nutrition, and that their parents who were poor and uneducated get on-the-job training in the railway systems. Look at what we have done to our railway systems. Look at what we have done to our public transport system. Now, all of those are avenues for on-the-job training and sustainable jobs. Instead, the kind of training, skills training that we have is exactly to create that black bourgeoisie. The theaters are simply avenues for dispensing of patronage to those who are politically connected. They don't produce the requisite skills that this economy, this society this political system so desperately need. We need to turn around and go back to the age-old apprenticeship system, which operates everywhere else, including our own African culture. You didn't learn hunting from watching your dad or him coming to tell you about hunting. You went with your dad on a hunt to learn how to hunt. You went with your mom to the fields to learn what to plant, when, etc. So why are we ignoring that indigenous wisdom and using a model which has failed for 27 full years and multi-billion rands later?
Well, we will be continuing that conversation, and after the break, the discussion moves to leadership and whether or not it has failed during this last week. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Fact. I'm continuing my conversation with Dr. Mampela Rampele. Dr. Rampele, leadership, and there's been this supposed vacuum of leadership that we have seen over the last few weeks, and a lot of people akin it to the 27 years that we have seen where, the ruling party and government just has not shown that sort of leadership that the country has needed. And I want to talk about what happened this week. President Cyril Ramaphosa, of course, said that there was an insurrection on Friday. 2 days later, Defense Minister Ms. Nosiviwe Mapisa Nkakula says there was no insurrection. And then to and from, we've got the economic and security cluster, going back and forth with regards to whether this was an insurrection or not. And I'm just asking myself, and I don't know whether you agree with me, that if you do not have consensus within your cabinet, how do you expect to lead by example?
Well, it is tragic to see how incoherent President Ramaphosa's cabinet system is. And this is tragic because he was given the opportunity to lead. He got the support of the majority of South African citizens. They were not voting for the ANC, they were voting for him because they had hope that he'll be able to do the transformation that is needed in the governance system of this country, which has been undermined, not only during the Zuma years. It started way back with the idea that the state and the party are conflated because we have liberated you, so you must just be quiet and we get around and do what we think is necessary. So this culture of lack of focus on accountability, on consequence management, on adherence to the constitutional values of our country, the failure to respect citizens and their basic rights has become so embedded in the body politic and the party of called the ANC, that it's not surprising what happened. What we, the people of this country, need to now know is that we are on our own. The beautiful thing is the Constitutional Court has ruled several months ago that citizens don't have to have a party to be able to govern their affairs. And so we as people, now that we have seen that we are on our own, we need to prepare for these coming local elections with our eyes wide open and understand that the destruction of the infrastructure of towns and cities is not going to stop unless we make sure that the local level governance, ward by ward, is led by people who are committed to the values of our constitution. We must stop looking to so-called politicians, to leaders. We are the leaders we have been waiting for. I'm particularly encouraged that the people who stood up against the chaos in the last few weeks and days were young people. South Africa is blessed with a very young population. Even those who are not educated, the 11 million that we are talking about, they are keen to make something of themselves. If only we had, and we can still do that, make sure that the cleaning up, the reconstruction of those damaged, particularly public infrastructure, is done as an opportunity for training on the job for all those millions who are unemployed. But also, we need to make sure that we use self-liberation models of education, particularly adult education for those young people who can't read and write. So they're not taught A, E, O, U, but they are taught through engagement with their daily lives, things that make it meaningful for them to be able to learn to read, to write, to be able to add and subtract, which they can do. We know, we have seen models like the LEAP school model, which is based in Deep Slope. I mean, you know how terrible Deep Slope looks. But out of that Deep Slope, you have young people who get A's in math, in science. Why? Not because they've got better teachers, but because of the way they are taught is to start by getting them to understand that they have the capability to be the best that they can be, and that they must never, ever allow themselves to be humiliated and embrace that humiliation. So they liberate themselves through this life orientation program at the LIP schools, and they're able, having come to believe that they have the talent, they have the brains, they have the energy, and that they have the support of their peers, they get A's in math, in science. And we are told that Black children can't do math. How can they not do math when their ancestors in Egypt built those pyramids, which required very complex mathematical configurations?
Dr. Rampele, I want to touch on accountability, and you brought up a very interesting point. When you see accountability, you learn by example. A son may learn from the father, a subject may learn from a king, so on and so forth. And as citizens of the country, especially those who go to bed hungry every single day, they see their leaders and they see that there's a lack of accountability. They see that a former president does not want to go to jail for contempt of court because he believes he's either too old or he believes that the justice system is not favoring him. And I want to specifically look at what had happened with regards to the looting. Would you say it is a fair assessment that those who committed the looting looked at government and looked at their lack of accountability and said, well, if they can get away scot-free, then so can I?
That's only part of the story. But certainly, it does not augur well for the country, for a president to be so deeply implicated in not only looting from the public purse, but inviting a family of non-South Africans to become citizens for the sole purpose of looting. And that he doesn't want to be accountable for that. And his party defended him for all of those so-called wasted years. They were part of the wastefulness. And so young people have lost faith in their leaders. And it is true that some will say, if they still, I'm only taking a little bit. But what I really would like to also make sure we don't forget is that young people are the ones who started standing up and saying no to this looting, which means that it takes very little to harness and to create support systems for that energy, that commitment, that desire, those aspirations for a future that's different. And so my view is, yes, the looting by political leaders, and incidentally, it takes two to tango. Our private sector in South Africa has been part and parcel of the looting, including the banks, the lawyers, the consultants. So it's not just the ANC. It is a system that was mutually beneficial to the public and the private sector, those who were properly connected. And so what we now need is to refuse to give our votes, and we should also refuse to support private sector companies, banks, and so on that have been part of this looting. Because it is only when we use our power to say no and use the space to work together to formulate, as we said in our preamble, a system of shared values so that we can rebuild our country in the image of the dreams that so many people went to jail for, some died for, some sacrificed their youth for. We have done it before and we can do it again. All we need to do is to wean ourselves from the idea that there is some knowledgeable leader somewhere who's coming to rescue us. We are the leaders we are waiting for.
And we hope for that to happen, Dr. Rampele. Dr. Rampele, before we go to the break, do you believe in your heart, and we speak from the heart because as South Africans, you know, we are very passionate people and we are people that hope for the best, that when it comes to the crime fitting the punishment, that blue-collar crime is not the only one that is punishable and seen for by law enforcement authorities, but also white-collar crime, the crimes that are being committed by the corporations, the crimes, for example, like your Steinhoff, who have gotten away and haven't been punished as yet, you know, the looting of VBS Mutual Bank that has happened and no one has been held accountable. Do you still believe that white-collar crime can still be punished in a judiciary that we have right now?
I absolutely believe that, but the sooner we start actioning those commitments, because people have been investigated, the cases are in the hands of the Hawks and the National Prosecuting Authority. The problem, of course, is that the looting was also very systematic in weakening those systems of accountability. But the one good thing, or one of the many good things that our president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has done is to revive the National Prosecuting Authority and the Hawks. But he needs to go much further, much faster to make sure that impunity is put behind us. People must know that you can't be 79 and plead age when you were a very well a person who was entrusted with so much, and you took an oath of office to be that custodian. And now, when we are asking you to account for what you failed to do, and in fact, the crimes you committed in the name of custodianship, then you say you are old and you are sickly. No. We have seen Warrenstein in the US. He can hardly walk, but he's still going to have to go through his 20-something years of imprisonment. And now he's been charged again in Los Angeles for sex crimes. And that will mean that he'll be there for the rest of his life. We need to put away all those people, young and old, who have looted and destroyed our asset base as a nation. They must go to where they belong. And we, the people, must rebuild this country on a very strong values base and a very strong accountability and consequence management framework.
Well, I will be continuing my conversation with Dr. Mampela Rampele. We do wrap it up after this break, so do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Fact. I'm wrapping up my conversation with Dr. Mampela Rampele, the co-founder of Reimagine SA. Dr. Rampele, what we've seen, and this is the nice, how do we put it this way, light at the end of the tunnel, and I know you mentioned it before, we saw the ordinary citizen of South Africa coming together, either cleaning up or protecting their communities. We saw the gogo on the streets of Durban sweeping. We saw that young man in Tlantla Lux defending Maponya Mall. We saw the Gift of the Givers and various other NGOs going ahead and providing aid. How good does that make you feel, seeing these citizens of South Africa, the communities, the NGOs playing their part to say, yes, we've gone through a very difficult time here in South Africa, but let us try and focus on those positives?
I'm very proud to be a South African. I've always known that it is in us because we were not liberated by an outside force. This idea that people who were living in exile came here and liberated us is, again, the falsehood on which this looting of our public purse is based on. That because they liberated us and therefore they deserve to have some kind of reward. I believe that the citizens of this country have seen with their own eyes what we as Reimagine South Africa has been saying, that South Africa can only be the country of our dreams if each and every one of its citizens stand up and say, in terms of the indigenous values of this country, Ubuntu, and the values that are embedded in our constitution that reflect that indigenous wisdom, we are not going to tolerate the abuse of power, the abuse of public resources, and we are not going to be fobbed off with some grants finance, which is simply undermining the dignity of people. Human beings were born to be able to contribute. We cannot solve the problem of unemployment, poverty, and joblessness and despair by giving people grants. I disagree very strongly with this resuscitation of the discussion on basic income grant. We can hardly pay the welfare grants that we are paying without massive looting. Now, this is simply going to be another looting avenue. As we have seen with COVID, PPEs or public personal protection equipment, that simply became a feeding trough. We want to see each and every one of young people in the villages, in the townships, in the towns, being given the opportunity of on-the-job training to do what the Gogos were doing, but do this formally, so that they can be the people who are doing waste management, sanitation work in the places where they live, and have the pride to be living in a space where their dignity is respected and they can in turn respect themselves and respect others that they live with. What grants do is to make people into children. We cannot infantilize citizens of this country, which is what the ANC has done, and that has to stop. And people have to stand up and say, no, I don't want a grant. I want the opportunity to use my brains, my creativity, my imagination to contribute to the country and to earn a respectable living.
Dr. Rampele, before we came on air, I was doing research, and of course, I stumbled upon, and this was not just a how do I put it this way, coincidental stumble. It was something that I really, really wanted to research, and it was the work by the late Steve Biko, and what the late Biko had said was, he wants to see his people, the African people, have the same rights. And this was something he echoed during the 70s, land ownership, having the land that was given to them by their ancestors, which was taken away because of colonialism, and just the basic human rights that were taken away from them for the last 400 years. We see that still happening when we go to the townships, when we go to the squalors, when we see the lines, as you mentioned, for the specific grants. And those are not, as you would say, giving them the basic human rights. Can we still live in the dream of the late Steve Biko? Are we still going to achieve that, where the basic humanities are granted to the people who had suffered so much during apartheid?
Absolutely. It's the only way we can rebuild this country on the basis of each one of us. What Steve Biko was talking about is that you cannot be a full human being if you are imprisoned in your mind and in your spirit, and you believe the lie that you are inferior. And part of the problem of poor governance in this country is that many of the people in government don't actually believe that Black people are as good as anybody else, including themselves. The only way they feel better is by having so much wealth that you can buy 6 cars. What are you going to do with the cars? It's trying to fill the hollow inside of an unliberated spirit. So what we need to do is to go back to promoting consciousness of what it means to be human. And this applies to everybody. This idea that in 2021, we're still talking about Black people, Indian people, colored people, white people, it's an indication of how we are still colonized, how we are still imprisoned by the divisions of the apartheid system. We need to jettison all of that. We are all South Africans. What does it mean to be human? And Ubuntu here comes to be the guide. If I see myself in you and you see me in yourself, there's no way you are going to abuse me, whether because I'm a woman or a child or whatever. So what we need is that, recapturing that consciousness and promoting it in each and every one of our children. And it is what the LEAP School for Math and Science has done effectively to make those young people coming from these horrible slums to be proud of who they are. And once they are proud, they produce. And once they produce, they lead. And once they lead, they are free people. So this freedom of the mind is an important starting point. That then enables us to have the servant leaders like we saw with the Mandelas. The Mandelas went through this process in jail. They liberated themselves in jail. Whereas many of the people who are in government today actually don't respect the people who look like them, because they don't respect themselves. And so this consciousness raising is part of the reimagination that is needed in this country. We need to reimagine who we are as a people and take pride in doing the best that we can as doctors, as nurses, as sweepers, as cleaners, as students, as anything. Because then we can work together to build this country, which is so beautiful, into an incredibly more beautiful place, which is inclusive of everybody, where everyone enjoys well-being and everyone respects everyone else. It is possible.
Dr. Rampele, one final question. One can have the consciousness, as you say, but it's worth taking that consciousness and putting it into action. We always speak about, is this the wake up call? Is this the eye opener? And we can see communities, NGOs, the normal citizens, they've woken up, they've opened their eyes to be seeing what is currently happening in our country. But do you think that after what we saw in this last few weeks, that government can open their eyes and say, well, it's time for us to act? Or is it a little bit too late, heading into the local government elections and ultimately in 3 years' time, the national elections?
Quite frankly, I have done a lot of behind the scenes work to try and help those in government, some of whom were my comrades, to do the right thing. I don't think they're capable of doing the right thing. It's like an alcoholic. They can tell you, no, I've stopped drinking. And then you catch them having a little nip under the table. So what citizens of this country must do is make the commitment to themselves, to free themselves from this dependence on leaders who have betrayed them so often, to build local level leadership. The local elections, thank God they've been postponed to next year. That gives us more time for young people and not so young people to organize as we did, street by street, ward by ward, to have the leaders who can take that budget for local government, for infrastructure, for all of the things that are necessary to restore the dignity of living for the majority of people. But we also need to have people in charge of metros such as Cape Town and Johannesburg to stop this apartheid geography. I mean, the idea that the DA government here wanted to auction SABC building instead of saying there are lots of men and women working in the city who have to travel for 3 hours to and from work every day, instead of making sure that we all live in this beautiful city and we can all work together to build it into a proper city, not a colonial city, not an apartheid city, but a city for all people. This is possible, but it's not rational for us as South Africans today, 27 years later, to imagine that what's happened last week is going to change the minds of people in the ANC. It is not rational. What we need to do is to go forth and mobilize leadership at the local level. If some of them, and I know there are some good people in the ANC, if those good people stop worrying about their pensions and worrying about remaining connected to the comrade and become part of a citizen movement that defends democracy, that demands accountability, that supports the weakest amongst us, and that makes sure that we build the country of our dreams, then they're welcome to join. But we shouldn't be waiting for them anymore. We've waited for 27 years. It's too long.
Dr. Mampela Rampela, you've just ended it perfectly there. We have waited for too long. We'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. God bless, and may we be able to go ahead and experience and listen to your wisdom. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. Well, Dr. Mampela Rampele, the co-founder of Reimagining SA, this was our discussion right here on the Daily Factor, as we still trying to pick up the pieces from what had happened last week with regards to the looting and unrest. Well, coming up after the break, we are going to be diving into the COVID-19 statistics and our newspapers. Do stay tuned. Welcome back to the Daily Factor. Let's go to our COVID-19 statistics for the day. And South Africa recorded 16,240 new confirmed COVID-19 infections and 516 deaths, bringing the official death total to 68,192. Let's go now to our Muslim statistics of the day. And unfortunately, 15 new deaths were recorded, with 4 of them coming from Gauteng. May Allah grant the marhum Jannatul Firdaus, inshallah, ameen, and make it easy on their families. Let's go to our newspapers, and we start off with The Citizen. And who Cyril can trust? Well, this is an interesting front page over there. The failed insurrection of last week and the backing of many of his cabinet ministers has strengthened President Cyril Ramaphosa's position in the ANC. And this is according to a political analyst who says he should take advantage of the situation. While the Olympic Games is about to start, the first Olympics that we are having in a pandemic this century, the Olympic rings in front of the Olympic Stadium in Tokyo, softball and football have started already, and the opening ceremony taking place tomorrow. And then on the top left-hand corner, Tatiana ready to make waves. Tatiana Schoenmaker, South African swimmer, looking to make her impact in the Olympics. Let's go to the sports page. And the British and Irish Lions, they're taking on the Springboks this weekend in Cape Town. The first pride. Wyn Jones completes incredible recovery. South African-born winger Duhan van der Merwe will start for the British and Irish Lions in the first test against the Springboks in Cape Town on Saturday. Tough going for Dialande. Damian Dialande will, of course, begin at centre for the Springboks in their test. And on the right-hand side corner, David Natwane. They have, the Bafana, the under-23s, will be taking on Japan, in Tokyo later on today in their first match of the Olympics. Well, let's go to the next newspaper, and that is The Star. Phoenix, the feel of the murdered, of course. It seems to be an ongoing situation. There are racial killings that are currently happening in that part of KwaZulu-Natal. There we go. KZN Premier Sitla Zikalala visiting families of people killed in Phoenix and in the city of Joburg. 3 ANC candidates for the mayoral positions for the upcoming local government elections. We then stay in the same province, but we move to Tshwane, to the Pretoria news. And Tshwane airport fees too steep. Flight School says they are landing in trouble financially and blame the city. This is at the Wonderboom National Airport. And Action SA names mayoral candidates for Gauteng and miles delayed polls. Picture there of Action SA leader Herman Mashaba, and on the left-hand side, Tshwane Utility Services MMC acting mayor Abel Tau. Let's go to the mother city. And in the Cape Times, taxi chaos slows vaccine plans. The taxi violence that continues to wreak havoc in the Western Cape. Western Cape records most gunshot wound cases in SA, and Moody's downgrade signals dysfunctional government in the city. This is according to the opposition there. We also on the right-hand side, city firms selected to manufacture COVID-19 vaccine. Staying in the mother city, but to the Cape Argus. And looting suspects will be brought to book. The National Prosecuting Authority says it will ensure that justice prevails despite numerous challenges it faces. And taxi war is destroying jobs. Another story that we, of course, mentioned in the Cape Times. And cautious steps as teaching staff return to school. Let's go to KwaZulu-Natal. And we go to the daily news. Phoenix body count rises, just as we mentioned in the Star, as the racial killings continues to take the lives of so many right there in that part of KwaZulu-Natal, and call for accountability for murderers, looters, and destruction. We stay in KwaZulu-Natal and the Mercury. City housing crisis is bubbling. Huge backlog means some eThekwini residents may have to wait up to 60 years for homes. And on the right-hand side, Mayor to ask Ramaphosa to allow religious gatherings. And then 2 more stories there. Zuma applies for permission to attend Brothers and Kandla funeral, and call for peace after Phoenix killings. Well, that's all we have for you here on the Daily Factor. We will see you again, same time, same place. Do enjoy the rest of your day. keep safe, and especially keep warm during this cold weather. From myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team, Linda, Tony, and Ellen and Jesse, do have yourself a good day. And God willing, we will see you again. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.